Hey guys, this is Martin. Welcome back to our next lecture, and this time it's a lab exercise. Basically, I'm going to show you a couple of commands and how to get started with wireless on Kali Linux, right? So first things first, I prefer to use Raspberry Pis for wireless pen testing. That has numerous reasons, because if I go out in the field and do active pen tests, it's always a bit burdensome to carry a laptop and have virtual machines on there and those kind of things. So that the Raspberry Pi is like a nice little device which you can easily carry around and hook it up, and it's completely isolated, right? Like it has effectively like its capabilities and things like that, but it's not like a virtualized machine. You don't have problems with adapters and stuff like that. So I just prefer that. But for lab purposes, I mean, feel free to use VMware Workstation, any other virtualization software like Oracle VirtualBox or whatever it is, or even like a dedicated machine. Just around those questions which always come up with Raspberry Pi, it's really, really simple to set this up. So you just head over to Kali, ARM, and then you download the correct version, basically based on your Raspberry Pi, which you have. So there's different ones. I have a Raspberry Pi 3, for example, and I effectively then download this, and then I go over to something called Berliner, and which is the flashing module. So it's a software, it's free, you download it, and what it does effectively is you take this image and then you flash a micro SD card with your image. And then once this is done, all you need to do is you put a blank SSH file in, effectively into the folder, and you put the SD card back into the Raspberry Pi or into the Raspberry Pi, you boot it up, and you look at your router, which IP address it got and stuff, and then you can SSH into it. It's really, really simple, and then you have your Kali Linux going. There's a ton of how-tos there, and it's not just for Kali Linux, right? Like you can use Dragon OS or other Ubuntu versions and things like that. So super easy. But let's go back to our lab, right? So one thing I want to call out first is I always work as root, right? Because it's my equipment, basically. Even in pen test engagements, you shouldn't normally work as root, right? Like for security reasons and things like that. So then you have to issue the sudo command. But if it's my Raspberry Pi and my equipment, basically it's a lot easier to work as root. And I wouldn't do this in a production environment, right? Like when I work at a customer side and things like that. But for pen testing purposes on my own equipment, I usually use root. Okay, so now let's get started. Let's take a look at ifconfig. So this lists all my interfaces, and you see like there's an Ethernet 0, which is connected to a LAN, and then I have two wireless interfaces. So one thing I want to call out is when I booted that up, there's only WLAN 0, which is basically the inbuilt Raspberry Pi wireless card, which is useless in that respect that it doesn't support packet injection, it doesn't support promiscuous mode, and so we cannot work with it. This is why I also plugged in my AWUS 1900 alpha adapter, which I presented earlier, which is my favorite card, and that came up as WLAN 1. So I can verify this here with iwconfig as well, and you can see that this is the one we basically want to work with, right? So let's get started. Let's first take a look here. So you see that WLAN 1 currently is being put into managed mode, right? So it's in managed mode by default. Managed mode is client mode, but this is not what we want as penetration testers. So what I'm going to do first is I need to shut down WLAN 1, so I can then make the change with iwconfig WLAN 1 mode monitor, right? So I need to put it into downstate first, put it into monitor mode, and then bring it back up. And if I now rerun an iwconfig, then you will see now it's actually monitor mode. Okay, so this is how you put a card into monitor mode. Of course, only a card which supports it. If I would have tried this with WLAN 0, it would have not worked because it doesn't support monitor mode, right? But this is basically how you do it. And once you have done this, like something else I want to show you real quick, which is the lsusb command. So the LS-USB is simply listing all the USB devices currently plugged into the system. And you can see here in the first line, this is my Alpha card. This is my Alpha wireless adapter, so it was successfully recognized. Most of the time, Kali Linux recognizes wireless adapters without the need of installing any additional software or drivers. Sometimes it doesn't, right? And then you need to use Google and you need to install the drivers, right? I put a link into the theory section earlier, like for the Alpha card. Sometimes that's the case. Most of the time it works plug and play out of the box, basically. Okay, so now basically let's put this card back into monitor mode. So step first is we have to shut it down again. Back into managed mode. So we shut it down. We shut the actual interface down, then we put it back into managed mode, right? And then we bring the interface back up, and now we check what happened, and it's back in managed mode, right? So super easy, very easy to do and fixed. But what is now really interesting for us is actually, so now we know how to put it into monitor mode, like now let's get started, right? Let's do something with it. So another utility, which is much easier to what I've just shown you. I just wanted to show you this in a manual way, but you can use airmon-ng, and you simply say airmon-ng start WLAN1, for example, right? Boom, like this, and you see it's being put into monitor mode, and then I do an iwconfig again, and all of a sudden you see, bang, it did the same thing. It basically shut down the interface, put it into monitor mode, and brought the interface back up. So it's much easier, it's a one-liner, right? And this is super easy, like if you want to do this. Now let's start monitoring. And so there's a tool called Aircrack-NG, which basically will now start sniffing the air, right? So Aircrack-NG WLAN1, and then normally if you hit enter, you would get all the list of all your APs and things like that, and also associated clients and probes and stuff like that. But I set up a test access point which we are going to work with throughout the course, basically, so that this is the one we are going to attack, and I simply copy the MAC address, and I need to say here BSSID, like this, and then I hit enter, and if all goes well, I should be seeing this soon. It should be coming up soon. So you see it's rotating around here in the channels, and if it doesn't come up, then I will launch like the full scan just to see if that makes any difference. But here it is, right? It just took a bit, and now you see here. So let's go through this, right? Like this is Aircrack-NG. And so basically what you see here on the left hand side is the BSSID, and that is the AP MAC address, right? You also see the power in dBm, and we talked about this earlier in the theory section. So this is extremely good. Why this is extremely good? Well, because the access point is right next to me, right? So I'm practically sitting next to it, and this is why I get really, really good value here. In practice, you don't see those values, but remember, everything which is better than -67 dB is acceptable to work with, whether it's from a pen testing perspective or whether that's from a use case perspective, right? You see the number of beacons. So seven times it was beaconed out. The SSID is called HackMe, right? As you can see here, there's no data going through, right? Well, this is quite simple because there's nothing associated with it at the moment. So what I'm going to do here is, and you can't see this, but I'm taking my mobile phone and I'm going to start to connect to that access point and see if this makes any difference. And you see the beacons went up right away. And when I start browsing, so it's not connected yet, right? But I'm connected now, and now I'm actually going to a website or something. It should actually start picking up data packets, which it doesn't at the moment. So also keep in mind, so sometimes these values here are delayed, right? And they're delayed because there is channel hopping going on. So you see this here, it's rotating around the channels. It's operating on channel 6, but it also looks at all the other channels, right? So channel 6 only gets a specific slot. This is also why it took a bit until we were able to see it, right? Because it's basically channel hopping around, because it not only wants to see channel 6 information, but it also wants to see information like in other channels, for example. In our case, it's not it's not displaying those. Why? Because I specified the BSSID that I only want to see this, but it's still doing the channel hopping, right? So this is important to recognize. What else? So basically here, so BSSID power level beacons data and the channel is operating on, the capability in terms of data rates, right? So this is just like a 54 meg, and encryption here is web. The old web protocol, I did this on purpose because I will show you another lab where we're going to break this. Cipher is web, no auth, and the ESSID basically. So this is, and there's no stations beaconing around here at the moment. So let me stop this, and I want to show you a couple of like useful things. When you have a wireless card, right, and say like if you buy one of Amazon or whoever, then you know if it's supporting 5 gig, 2.4 gig, both, or just 2.4, right? Like you know that, whether it's like multi-band or single band. But if you get a wireless card from a friend or something and you don't know, like, hey, what's the capabilities on that? There is a command called iwlist. So you can simply run iwlist, right? And then you can, for example, say iwlist WLAN1, which is my wireless adapter in this case, and then I say frequency, right? And that gives me basically the capabilities of this specific physically plugged in wireless card. And as you can see here, like it is certainly able to operate in 2.4 gigahertz. So you see all these channels up to 13, right? But you can also see channel 36 all the way through to 140 is also possible, and that's the 5 gigahertz range. So this is a clear check, or like a clear indication that my wireless card is dual band and can do both. And if you buy one, I really highly recommend you buy a dual band one, because a lot of access points are still operating and will always operate probably, or for the foreseeable future, on 2.4 gig, but more access points are also now using 5 gig. And you really, from a pen tester perspective, you really want to make sure that you cover both of those, right? So this is also very important. So now, what another command I want to show you, which I didn't have to use, is the so-called airmon-ng check kill. So this is a command which I can issue here, and what this is basically doing is it's killing processes which might interfere with your wireless LAN card, right? And sometimes you need to do this, like when you do a lot of work and when you bring up interfaces and shut down interfaces and you're working with multiple wireless adapters, there is a chance for collusion between those, right? Like that certain processes don't work and things like that. And so this is a quick command which you can do if you have problems, if you get error messages. It's this command airmon-ng check kill, and that basically helps you in many cases. Okay, last thing I want to show you here is like you can also basically filter on band, right? Like I could, for example, put in band A, and then I only get the 5 gigahertz, right? Because band A is only operating in 5 gigahertz, or band B, 11 megabits per second and 2.4 gigahertz, right? Or band G and stuff like that. So if you see a lot of access points and things like that, then I mean, I always like to work with the BSSID, like what I've shown you earlier, like the BSSID flag. Why? Because if I'm pen testing, chances are that there's a lot of other access points out there, and I'm not allowed to touch them, right? Like I only have permission from my client to pen test this specific one SSID, for example, or a bunch of SSIDs, but I cannot just like, do a lot of things with other access points. So this is why I like this flag a lot. Okay, so that's the first introduction. I recommend that you replicate this in your own Kali installation. It's just like basically bringing down the interface, bringing up the interface, change the mode, like from monitor to managed and back, play with the airmon-ng. Like something I also highly recommend is like airmon-ng help, which basically gives you like, exactly like the use case. You can do the same thing with aero dump ng --help, which it is very powerful. Like, I mean, we are using it only for certain things. You will see later that we use more advanced features as well, but it is very powerful what you can do with it, and the options you have and the filters you have, and you can put in regexes and stuff like that. Like I use this quite a lot in the real world when I have a bunch of SSIDs from a client to test and things like that. But always use the -- help option. It's really useful, and you can also always ask Google if you're stuck at any point in time. But this is the basic introduction and how to get started, and I hope this makes sense, and I see you in the next lab.